activist Sonny Johnson pushed back on the president.
The most Trumpers out of everybody in this room, so you gotta have to forgive me. The black community is not doing okay. Like I understand the perspective and the desire to put out this talking point, but it's not okay.
The president did not respond to that.
Thank you, Sonny. Appreciate it.
And he and his administration continue to oppose allegations of systemic racism in law enforcement.
Our community is scared to call the cops, and that's dangerous.
Despite nationwide protests calling for police reform, the president has yet to say what, if anything, he would like to see done to address the issue of police brutality. And even with Army leaders saying they are willing to discuss renaming 10 U.S. military bases named after Confederate generals, including Fort Hood in Texas and Fort Bragg in North Carolina, President Trump says he won't even consider it. Retired Major General Dana Petard told CBS News the names always seemed insulting to him.
These 10 generals fought against the United States Army, killed U.S. troops.
President Trump is planning to resume his campaign rallies next Friday in Oklahoma. They've been on hold during the COVID pandemic, but it's not clear how the campaign plans to do that safely. And last night, Vice President Pence posted and then deleted this photo of him visiting campaign headquarters. Dozens of staffers are seen in close quarters, and nobody is wearing a mask. This goes against the social distancing guidelines of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, which the Vice President heads up. His office has not explained why the photo was taken down.
Okay, so here's an article where Trump brought in a whole bunch of black people who support him, apparently celebrities. But this article is about Trump rejects renaming military bases named after Confederate generals. By dismissing an idea under consideration by the Pentagon, the president positioned himself firmly against the movement to remove racist symbols and combat racism touched off by George Floyd's death. And here he is seen with everyone around him is black. Trump met with African American advisors and supporters on Wednesday at the White House. So a little more. President Trump responded to waves of demonstration for racial justice on Wednesday by picking a fight over the legacy of the Confederacy, further inflaming the nation's culture war at a time when tensions were already high after the killing of George Floyd and widespread street protests against police brutality. On the same day that Mr. Floyd's brother pleaded with Congress to tackle racism in the United States, Mr. Trump publicly slapped down the Pentagon for considering renaming Army bases named after Confederate officers who fought against the Union and during the Civil War. The White House said the president would go so far as to refuse to sign the annual defense authorization bill if Congress tried to force his hand. In speaking out on behalf of Confederate-based names, the president positioned himself even more firmly against the growing movement for change that has emerged since Mr. Floyd's death in the custody of a white Minneapolis police officer who pressed a knee on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. While Mr. Trump has denounced the killing, he has emphasized a law and order, pro-police message, appealing to his hardcore base, and dismissed complaints of systemic racism. But he has appeared to be tacking against the popular tide, as polls show wide public support for protesters in the streets, and as various institutions in society have scrambled to demonstrate solidarity with the broader aims of the demonstration. Even some sectors of American life that Mr. Trump has catered to were breaking the other direction. Only 2 hours after his defense of Confederate base names, NASCAR announced that it would ban Confederate flags from its races. The NFL has already reversed itself to embrace kneeling players protesting racism. The Capitol Speaker Nancy Pelosi called the removal of 11 remaining statues of Confederate figures, including Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee, days after Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia vowed to remove the statue of Lee from the storied Monument Avenue in Richmond. Okay, so here's the main part of my discussion. Not so much about him and not renaming the bases. Mr. Trump stretched credulity again on Wednesday in insisting that he has done more for African Americans than virtually any other president. I think about that. You think of the 1964 Civil Rights Act under Lyndon Johnson, Fair Housing Act, all these different things like that. But yet, Mr. Trump claims that he has done more for African Americans than virtually any other president, citing financial support for historically black colleges and universities and legislation to overhaul criminal sentencing. Well, you know what? Not every black person is a criminal. You should know that. So, by letting a few people out of prison, by either pardoning them or commuting their sentence, that's not helping the majority of black people. That's just helping a few people whose celebrities came to him and gave their names. So that doesn't help me, for example, because I never sold drugs and I wasn't in prison for drugs. So I don't need a pardon, and I don't need for a sentence to be commuted. So he invited in cameras to record him meeting with a half-dozen black advisors and supporters. Mainly, it seemed to have them echo his complaints that he was not being treated fairly by the newspapers, by the news media. But the president expressed no sympathy for the idea of renaming the 10 Army bases that honor Confederate generals who were traitors to the United States and fought against the American military to defend the slave-holding South. Among them are Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Fort Hood in Texas, and Fort Benning in Georgia. The United States of America trained and deployed our heroes on those hallowed grounds and won 2 world wars, Mr. Trump wrote in a string of Twitter messages. Therefore, my administration will not even consider the renaming of these magnificent and fabled military installations. Our history as the greatest nation in the world will not be tampered with. Respect our military. So those are his words. You see, but the president outburst infuriated senior officials at the Pentagon at a time when the commander-in-chief and his top military leaders have already been clashing over how to respond to street protests. Mr. Trump wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 to send active duty troops into the cities to take on looters and rioters, only to run into heated and eventually public resistance from the Defense Secretary Mark T. Esper and General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I'm going to stop here.